Good afternoon. My name is Kenan Ferguson. I'm the director of the Center for 21st Century Studies. And I'd like to welcome all of you here to an event that falls under one of our lecture series called EmergentC21. It's a way in which we address issues, look into issues that appear suddenly, that are emergent issues, that aren't the ones that when most of the things we organize we try and do 6 or 7 or 8 months in advance. But we occasionally have issues such as the visa promise that come up as a question that emerges in the middle of a semester. This panel was organized by our PA, who I will introduce you to in a moment. But first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's participating here and everybody who's taken the time to come and see this. Please make sure that if you haven't on your way in, that you sign our list of people here. We'd like to show the administration that events like this are well attended and are important, and that the community, both the university community and the larger community, care about investigating intellectual issues that are of importance to our contemporary condition. So I'd like to introduce you to our PA, Leila Saboori.
Thank you, Kenan. Hello, everybody. My name is Leila Saboori. I'm a PhD student in architecture and C21's project assistant. First of all, before saying anything, I would like to thank the Center for 21st Century Studies for hosting this important event and giving me the opportunity to organize it. This panel discussion was precipitated by 2 recent executive orders on immigration, both currently blocked by U.S. federal judiciary that barred nationals of 7 or in the revised version 6 Muslim majority countries from entering the United States regardless of their visa status. These events affected thousands of people living inside the U.S. or waiting on the borders to enter the country, as well as provoking questions about the nature of the visas themselves. This panel will address the concepts behind the visa as promised and will cover the promises made to the people who are living here and to those who might live here in the future. Personally, as an international student at UWM holding F1 visa, I think there has not been enough discussion about how this executive order affected student visa holders. Nor does it seem that visa holders themselves were entirely aware of the precarious nature of the visas. A considerable number of graduate students in the American universities are international students. This visa ban will affect their personal lives as well as their ongoing research and studies. In educational terms, in legal terms, and in human rights terms, the promise of visa is today's question. And the answers to this question will have unmeasurable impact on all these terms. So today's panel will be chaired by Arijit, professor of architecture in the School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And everybody please join me in welcoming Professor Sen.
Thank you all for coming. So after his inauguration, Donald Trump followed up his campaign rhetoric with an executive order on immigration. And it basically barred nationals from 6 Muslim majority countries, in the first one, from entering the United States. While the order itself faces multiple legal challenges, the rhetoric and public discussions around this topic has created much fear, divisiveness, and confusion. At UWM, we have had many bureaucratic events, informational meetings, student forums, and discussions. Yet, as an university, it is necessary for us to go beyond the instrumental and informational sessions to a discussion that is intellectually and academically oriented towards the way we talk around entry visas and how that talk might have radically transformed public discourse. This roundtable promises that discussion that'll help us understand the larger geopolitical, ethical, and moral consequences of this event. I'd like to thank the Center for 21st Century Studies and those who worked so hard and tirelessly to make this event possible, especially Leila, to Kenan and to John, who also first contacted me about this event. Thank you very much for organizing this. You know that from the poster that the discussion that follows will ask each panelist here to address the following questions. Is a visa a legal document? What is the legal and social understanding of the US visa? What are the rights a visa holder has? How has the executive order affected visa application? How does this executive order affect international students studying in the American university? What is the overall impact of this higher education? All that stuff. But I want to bring in another issue that actually involves me. It has to do with a document, a memo, that brings tears to my eye every time I've been reading it as part of a class. A line from the Declaration of Independence. It states that one of the many reasons that the colonies separated from the Great Britain, and I quote here, is he, the king, has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land, end quote. In the 21st century, we often talk about immigration solely as somehow just a narrow legal issue that can be resolved by filling up some forms or critiquing the government. Yet, when I turn to the Declaration, a memo that clearly argues that all people, all of us, with our intuitive sense of fairness, are moral beings, and that we should act and critique our government in a very holistic way. We may no longer keep doing that, just our portion, which we always do. Me as a teacher signing off on my student's exam, the bureaucrats merely making sure that the rules are followed, the legal officers simply ensuring jurisprudence. Instead, as part of a great institution of learning, we gather here to examine the larger significance of our actions and put them in a holistic, I forgot what the word is, perspective, yes. So the Visa Promise brings together Milwaukee community, field experts, UWM researchers in conversation with the new immigration order and its impact on human life. It will cover the promise made to people who are living here and to those who might live here in the future, as well as addressing the general perception of United States abroad. Let me introduce the roundtable panelists today. First, Professor Kristin Sziarto is Associate Professor of Geography at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She has a PhD in Geography from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. She's affiliated with Urban Studies and Women's and Gender Studies. Her research focuses on the relationship among spatiality, power, and subjectivity, especially in urban social movement alliances. Her earlier research looked at religion-labor alliances and immigrant activism in the U.S. Midwest. Her recent research with her colleagues and community partners is called Muslim Milwaukee Project. It attends to local Muslim lives and activism. Other Milwaukee-based research examines controversies around cities' infant mortality reduction program through the lenses of biopolitics and reproductive justice. She also studies teaching and learning in higher education, especially how students develop critical thinking through case studies of contentious politics at multiple scales. Next is Professor Rachel Ida Buff. She's Professor of History and the coordinator of Comparative Ethnic Studies program. Her interests include immigration rights, transnational cultural politics, especially that of the Cold War, diasporic cultural citizenship. She has numerous publications that include, for instance, Immigration and the Political Economy of Home, West Indian Brooklyn and the American Indian Minneapolis, 1945 to 1992. That's at the University of California Press. an edited volume, Immigrant Rights in the Shadows of U.S. Citizenship, New York University Press, and then her latest, Against the Deportation Terror, Organizing for Immigrant Rights in the 20th Century, due out from Temple University Press in November of this year. Dr. Buff has served under various capacities within American Studies Association, Voces de la Frontera, Jewish Museum of Milwaukee, and she's always foregrounding the voices and histories of immigrant and ethnic groups. Next, Anna Mansson McGinty is Associate Professor of Geography and Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Her research centers on the formation of Muslim identities and geographies in the West, examining identity processes, gender and religion, and the politics of representation. She is the author of Becoming Muslim, Western Women's Conversion to Islam, Palgrave Macmillan publication, which examines the conversion to Islam among Swedish and American women. As a Global Studies Fellow this year, she is working on a multi-year ethnographic project, Young Muslim and American, an ethnography of Muslim youth in Milwaukee, which centers on diverse religious, political, and personal expressions of Muslim youth cultures and identities in the 21st century America. Her work has been published in journals such as Environment and Planning, Gender, Place and Culture, Social and Cultural Geography, and The Professional Geographer. And finally, Davrin Odrcic is an immigration lawyer based in Milwaukee, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Yes, I was going to say Sovereign, but Davrin. He primarily represents individuals who have been placed into removal proceedings before the Chicago Immigration Code. Davrin is the author of a book titled Immigration Consequences of Wisconsin Criminal Offenses, which has been published to the State Bar of Wisconsin. He has also been honored for his pro bono work for family members of the victims of the Sikh temple shooting in Oak Creek. I welcome the speakers. Each of them will have 13 minutes, and then we will have, once they're done, we'll have a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Arijit. So, since my background includes not anything legal but research on immigrant activism and thinking that through geographies of social movements and citizenship and democratic theory and biopolitics, what I would like to do in my time is expand the questions posed for us as panelists by asking, if a visa is a promise, a promise of something related to citizenship. And if citizenship is understood not only as a legal category, but also, as is in most of the interdisciplinary citizenship literature, if it's also understood as a set of norms structuring one's relation to a polity. If it's a promise about something to do with citizenship, who or what made that promise? And then what is to be done about a breaking of that promise? So, to the first question, who or what made this thing we're thinking of as a promise? It's the U.S. state, right? Specifically, it's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that issues visas. And I'm going to be thinking this through a political geographic perspective on the state. So if it's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that issues visas, although in some cases there are waivers, et cetera, determined by the U.S. State Department, then we still need to go back and ask, what is this entity, the U.S. state? As with any nation state, it's a very complex entity. We can break it down into a lot of different parts. It's consular staff in U.S. consulates in cities around the world. It's more staff in USCIS offices in the United States, yet more staff in the head offices of the State Department and USCIS in D.C. and so on. So one way to think about this is as a hierarchically scaled, uneven, and differentiated network of people, documents, machines, ideas, and categories related to citizenship, as well as laws. But coming back to that visa, right? Visas and other categories related to citizenship, different categories, are not only issued or denied in these spaces, visas are also dealt with in other spaces of the state. Okay? They're checked and policed in other locations by other parts of the U.S. state, one of my least favorite being Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, right, since the passage of the Patriot Act. And this arm of the U.S. state is linked to a network of so-called detention centers, including large prisons, smaller county jails, and even hotels that are used to detain, i.e. imprison, migrants. Even migrants asserting refugee status have been and may be detained in detention centers, county jails. And in the case of, I know from having visited the Chrome detention facility outside of Miami, they said, oh yeah, we don't have room for the women and children, so they're at that hotel over there, being imprisoned in a hotel. Okay. Maybe you're seeing where I'm going here, so I'm not going to go into detail about the immigration courts, some of which are shadowy affairs that are placed really, really far from family members and lawyers that represent the people who are being detained. So my purpose in telling this story about all these different places that the U.S. state operates in its different branches is twofold. Okay. First, although the symbolism of the state is powerful, the idea of the visa as a promise is really powerful and it's real. Okay, this symbolism operates through. Getting a visa is arduous. Okay, it takes many, many stages, a lot of effort, a lot of paperwork. With accomplishment of the visa bringing relief, bringing anticipation of future pursuits in a country that for decades has cast itself as offering dreams of prosperity and freedom, with U.S. consulates displaying and standing in as symbols of those dreams. And all these meanings are true, okay, that the visa is a promise of these dreams. However, the way that the U.S. state, as I've described it, structures its entire regime of visa issuance isn't really with people's dreams in mind. Actually, the U.S. state is operating more with logics informed by flows of capital investment and labor needs, and systems of racialized, gendered, sexualized, classed, etc. processes of valuation that sets a person's place in those flows of capital and labor. And this is why there's a world of difference between the F1 student visa, the H-1B professional visa, especially in comparison with the H-2A temporary agricultural worker visa. And then there's the really interesting, I didn't know about this one until recently, the EB-5 investor visas, which have seen applications skyrocket in the past 2 months. Those are not included in the executive order. Right? The F1 student visas are, the H-1Bs are, the H-2As absolutely are, but the EB-5s are not included in the executive order because we need those investors. Okay? So visas aren't about the dreams in the way that the U.S. government issues them. Visas differentiate and position people differently, though their dreams may be quite similar. And it's U.S. demands for certain kinds of labor and capital that structure a lot of this, so that one person's promise may be at the same time be another's profit. My second point has to do with that complex spatiality of the state, and therefore citizenship. Okay? So we tend to think of the national state as who's issuing a visa grantor as the key actor here. And again, that's true, but there are problems with this. The tendency has long been to think of this national state as a bounded territory, and at that boundary is where the visa and the passport holders are let in, right? But this border is not just enforced at the border. Political geographers and others have been showing that since at least 2001, the border of the U.S. has moved to the interior of U.S. territory, with there being multiple permanent checkpoints miles inside the United States, with Immigration and Customs Enforcement patrols on buses and trains, whether it's in upstate New York or somewhere in New Mexico, and with raids in neighborhoods and in workplaces. And in what I see going on in the media the past few years is that many people assume that undocumented immigrants are the only targets here. But if we look back at September 2001 into April 2002, this was a time during which hundreds of Muslims were rounded up and detained and interrogated, again, in response to the Patriot Act. So the spatiality is, again, not just at the border. The border might be drawn very close to where we are, depending on who we are. Now, I don't mean then that we should cynically cave to this biopolitical sorting and servicing of capitalism. And I don't agree that we should accept that these various visas are simply legal labels for different kinds of people that are slotted in. But if we're going to effectively fight against the ban and other aspects of this immigration system, we need to keep both production and the spatialities of the state and citizenship in sight. And for this, I'd like to suggest a conceptualization from a few political geographers of thinking about citizenship as ordinary. Think of the ordinariness of citizenship and how the everyday matters and struggles around citizenship status. These geographers argue that citizenship is not only legal standing, but again, it's social norms, especially norms with reference to notions of justice and care. And Arijit, I feel like you already said this, but I think it bears repeating. Notions of justice and care. And further, so in terms of the everyday norms, what do we think is just in our everyday lives? Who do we care about in our everyday lives? And also, the communities we live in, that ordinary citizenship, and citizenship includes all these visa status, that there are relations to polities. Okay? So these communities that we live in, including the social, cultural, and material and digital worlds, and the institutions we inhabit. And so I'd suggest that we all can be examining our everyday lives and asking, how can we enact community? And how can we enact social norms grounded in justice and care to reorder relations right here in the university as an institution? How can we do things here that struggle against the ban, against deportations, and against detention? Starting right here at the university, the Faculty Senate passed a sanctuary resolution, thanks largely to the leadership of the local chapter of the Association of American University Professors and Professor Buff right here among them. How many people here know about the faculty resolution on sanctuary? Awesome. How many people have read the resolution? Awesome. How many people have been told by their department chair or someone in authority that we're supposed to work on this and respect it and not give our students data away? Okay, when I looked at this, I was like, oh, there's actually lots of different things that are said here that are going to be happening that aren't yet being done, even though it's said that it's resolved that the Faculty Senate and directs the Chancellor to do a whole bunch of things. Okay, so, and fortunately, we're just going to talk about that. So, we're going to pay attention to that. That's what I'd like to call on everyone to do today, is think about what are we going to be able to do. We need to make sure everyone knows about this. We need to make sure that it's implemented. Oversight is part of that. Even if you're not personally implementing it, asking other people that you think should be held responsible, you can be doing that. At the same time, I really want to call on faculty and academic staff, especially those of us with tenure-like statuses, and how we can consider our roles as our students and our graduate students' mentors and advisors and workplace supervisors. In my role in this way, this means to me not just protecting my students' data, but considering the effects of this on their academic progress and providing support, possibly extended deadlines, other kinds of support as they are affected. The students from the 6 countries named in the revised executive order have been the ones most clearly and directly affected, but ICE is detaining and turning back people from other countries as well, okay? Including a whole bunch of people from South Korea, including an academic from France, including an entertainer from South Korea, including a children's book writer from Australia. What was that about? I'm still not clear on that. Okay, I mean, and they've detained citizens as well. Okay, no one is actually, don't expect everybody's going to walk through TSA so easily. We need to listen to our students, find out how they're affected, and in some cases personally intervene to help them. And for those of us, and to follow up Arijit's call with the discussions here, for those of us for whom it's appropriate to teach about these issues, we must teach about them. And we should be raising these questions about not only law, but again, the foundations of both law and everyday practices and ideals of justice and care. And that's where I'll wrap up and hand it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Kristin. That's great. Thanks for mentioning our sanctuary resolution. I'm going to set my stopwatch because otherwise I'll just go on. So I just want to say first that thank Leila and thank Kenan and John and Arijit. I guess I'd like to say when I speak now that I feel like everyone I know feels overwhelmed and like we can never do enough, and that the forces arrayed against us are so giant. And I think that afternoons like this, being around each other and talking about this stuff matters. I think taking the time to organize something like this matters. I think we can feel at any moment that, what we're up against is so much larger than we are. But I think that these moments really matter. So let's just take a deep breath. So I'm a historian, so I'm going to speak chronologically. I'm going to start with the past. Then I'm talking about the present. Then I'm talking about the future. That's kind of how we roll. So just briefly, nobody likes historians to go on for long about this stuff, but we have to. The exporting of border controls abroad, or the evolution of the visa system, begins in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it begins really by a targeted population. So this is exactly what's going on right now. In the case of the late 19th and early 20th century, the evolution of documentation, the evolution of the need for photographic ID evolves around the policing and regulation of Chinese migrants into the United States. But, and this is really important, because stuff rolls uphill. It starts with the least powerful, and eventually it goes to everybody. And this is something that we should all attend, right? Whatever our immigration status, however many generations we've been here. It started with the Chinese. It migrated to all Asians needing that kind of paperwork to be in the country, or to leave the country, or to come back in the country. Then it was Mexican migrants at the newly torn out of Mexico-U.S. border, coming back and forth across. Then it was Europeans, and in fact the 1924 Immigration Act, which some of you may have heard of, which is a big regulation act, was also known at the time as the Visa Act, because it said everyone needs a visa to come in and out of the country. And then, interestingly, we all, citizen, denizen, undocumented, wind up needing all kinds of paperwork, right? So we're at precisely this moment right now, where the more paperwork, the more kinds of controls, the more mechanisms that are generated, they start with targeting the Six Nations. They start with what Khalid Beydoun calls state-sponsored Islamophobia. Essentially, we have to scrutinize people from these countries very closely. We have to, what he calls the national project of identifying and punishing the terrorist outsider. It starts there, but it does not. There is no guarantee at all. And if history is any proof, and it often is, it will not stay there, right? So I think those things are important to know. So I went back and I read the executive orders. Humanist friends, we need to do a little close reading of these things, because it is a sci-fi document. It is a wild collection of crazy, and it is the law of the land. It's being contested, and it's shot. It's like a Swiss cheese document. Okay, I can't even. All right. The basic contention here is that the problem, what happened on 9/11, you all remember that, right? What happened on 9/11 happened because our foreign consuls were not able to adequately identify or scrutinize visa applicants. And this act purports to offer them the technology to do that. The executive order as much as says, if President Bush hadn't been asleep at the wheel, we could have stopped 9/11. So this is a very characteristic of our current executive baseless, crazy assertion. But it goes on to say a lot of other things that I think we need to attend to very carefully. It upholds a notion of what I call preventive deportation, which is that we need to stop foreign nationals who intend to do things in this country. Now, intent is a really interesting metric, right? It reminds me of some of the assessment work that professors have to do. I don't know how we gauge intent. I don't know how immigration inspectors at the border or in consuls are meant to gauge intent. Let it be said that right now, to get a visa, you do paperwork, you do an interview, there's a background check, there's biometric screening. All of this is going to be reinstalled and re-implanted. And there are a lot of mechanisms, what are called in the document mechanisms for eliciting, quote, fraudulent and malicious intent. And I just think we should sit with this fiction for a little bit, because I don't really know how you can tell what fraudulent or malicious intent are. The other piece of it that's really important and striking is that a visa is a transnational project, right? It's something that a foreign national obtains in often a country that's not their own, that's not the United States either, but sometimes their own country, at an embassy, right? And then they're allowed in. Very much in this document purports to scrutinize the consuls and the administrations of other countries. And in fact, there's a provision with the six-band countries that there's a 60-day period of scrutiny, after which if the United States is not convinced that those countries are doing the same due diligence that we are, those countries will remain on the ban list. So once we've scrutinized the bureaucratic administration of Syria, Iran, Libya, anyway, they can be banned forever, right? Based on our evaluation of whether they can implement mechanisms to evaluate intent, implement ID verification, And so we're essentially going to cancel visa reciprocality and cancel our relations. There's also in the executive order provision 2, and this is sort of a favorite tactic of this administration with regard to the foreign-born, and we see it in the other executive order, the Border Security and Immigration Enforcement Improvement Act, which targets transnational criminal organizations and undocumented people, and I'm not going to talk about it that much, but we can get into it in Q&A if you want. The public information is really interesting that will be listed as policy. It's all terrorist acts committed by foreign-born people will be listed. It should be said that all of the killings on U.S. soil by jihadis since 9/11 have been done by people who are citizens or legal permanent residents. So there's a really interesting conceit here, which is that by scrutinizing the people with visas and who are trying to get in the country, you're going to be able to stop crime. That isn't really supported. But what will be published are terrorist acts, and then I really can't even quite get my mind around this. Acts of radicalization or material support. Now bear in mind that under the Patriot Act, some of the organizations you buy cookies from in the Union on a Thursday may be organizations that contribute to organizations that contribute to organizations that contribute to organizations that are linked with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and you don't know it, and they don't know it. That can be considered material support, right? I'm hosting next week in my house a representative of the Palestinian organization Badil. We'll have an event Wednesday night, Ascension Lutheran Church, 6 o'clock. We're talking about Palestinian and other human rights. I can bring them to speed on that if you want. But it just struck me yesterday as I was getting ready to talk about it somewhere else, like, oh, I wonder if Badil is on a material support list, or I wonder if they're like, easily my family. Joe's like, oh God, you didn't tell me this. Is that material support? I don't really know. I haven't done the research. But because this stuff is crazy and the research is unsupported, right? But a list of acts of radicalization or material support. And I also want to know, as somebody who endeavors to radicalize young people all the time, what acts of radicalization are? What are the indices of radicalization? What are the metrics for that? Those are going to be published. Those lists are going to be published. Gender-based acts of violence will be published. That would be the day, right? And particularly the much vaunted in the text of this law, honor killings, which this law concerns itself with quite substantially. I really think we need to take this up. I really think that the executive orders rolling out of the White House we need to, humanities folks, we need some close reading here. Because there's a real interesting legal surrealism taking place in our country. That's the present. I want to talk a little bit about the future. So, in response to the Sanctuary Campus resolution that the Faculty Senate passed, the Chancellor issued 2 updates. The first one on November 30th called Unwavering Support for Our Diversity, and the second one on the 29th of January of this year in response to the first iteration of the ban, UWM welcome and supports all. Administrators are not going to have the same language that faculty and students have about these issues, right? They're going to fall, there's many a slip between cup and lip, right? They're going to fall a little short of where we want them to be. That's sort of their job. This is what I've learned from my work in AUP. Never going to say what we want them to say. So, in unwavering support for our diversity, the Chancellor said we support our DACA and undocumented students. In terms of responding to a sanctuary campus, we will protect our students' privacy under FERPA. The UWM police will not routinely gather information about citizenship and immigration status. It outlines, you can look at the documents that are online at the Chancellor's webpage. I think we should see these as capacity building. I think we should see this as an invitation to ask for more, because they're written in the legalese that the Chancellor is coached to write in by his legal team to say as little as possible in as many words as possible. Also not good writing, but that's another story. That means we can say what we think that this means. What we think welcoming undocumented students means is this. So in the UWM Welcome and Supports All response to the ban on January 29th, the Chancellor talked about how he had supported 2 pretty good statements by the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities and the Association of American Universities, both of which criticize the ban and talk about the welcome for international talent. There are 15,450 students in the country from the 6 banned nations. There are 2,100 scholars from the 6 countries. Of the 6 U.S. Nobel Prize winners in 2016, all of them were foreign-born. Our international applications, at last count, the provost announced this at 5% last time, are down by 46%. So this is useful for us. It is a business issue for our campus, which is so reliant on the talent and the tuition dollars of international students. 46% in response to the ban that our government has enacted, right? So I think that, I guess my invocation here is to take the words of the Chancellor's legal team seriously and hold them accountable for that. And I think that there's lots of grounds for us to come together and decide, sort of as Kristin was saying, what kind of community do we want to have? What does it mean to us to welcome international students? What does it mean to us to support our academically black students? We get to decide that, and then we get to say, you know what, you said right here that you would do this. So I'll stop there. Thank you. No, I have 30 seconds.
Thank you, and thanks to all for coming this afternoon. It's good to see this many people here, although not many of you students, but it's really good to see this many people showing up. And I would like to thank C21 for organizing it, to Leila and Hannah and for Arijit for moderating for this really important topic that is quite urgent. And similar to Kristin, sorry, do you hear better now? Yeah. Similar to Kristin, my expertise does not lie in the legal dimensions, surrounding visa issuing and immigration. Rather, my expertise is in American Muslim lives and identities, their sense of belonging, and politics and activism. And so when Leila approached me to talk, I was like, I'd be happy to, but what I would like to focus on then is actually how this immigration ban affects American Muslims, regardless of legal status, right? And this is what Kristin also, both Kristin and Rachel touched on in terms of, citizenship and being on different visas and so on. So it is affecting all American Muslims. American Muslims are, as most probably of you know, the most racially and ethnically diverse religious group in the United States. We obviously don't have exact numbers, but we know most likely it's between 7 to 10 million people of different legal statuses and so on. And so undeniably, this kind of ban has social, political, and existential, I would like to emphasize, ripple effects throughout the American Muslim community. It is an extension of war on terror rhetoric, and it has heightened a climate of fear. It's absolutely undeniable, a climate of fear. I just heard a recent interview with Louise Kankar, who is a Marquette scholar, who talked about it as a crisis mode, a perpetual kind of crisis mode that she encounters within the American Muslim community. And so, I think many of us would agree, and the description of Rachel of this ban is discriminatory, it's arbitrary, it's really unclear how it addresses particular security concerns. But what is clear is that this is a state kind of sponsored Islamophobia, an anti-Muslim state rhetoric, and it is not really existing by itself, right? We remember other promises of Muslim registry and Muslim databases, and I think maybe worth mentioning in a parallel policy that is on the table, the bill, Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act bill, that was introduced or reintroduced by Ted Cruz in January of this year, which seems to be kind of a reformulation of a bill from 2015 that designates the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt would blacklist it as a terrorist organization, but also then what are, I would emphasize, mainstream American Muslim institutions such as CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, and ISNA, both of them two of the largest Muslim American national organizations. CARE is the largest civil rights advocacy in the United States, and they would be designated, if this bill would come through, right, as Muslim Brotherhood affiliates and therefore also terrorist organizations. And I don't know of any larger city who have American Muslim organizations that don't work with these larger national organizations to some degree. So here we are, as both Rachel and Kristin are talking about, it's trickling down on many different levels at different scales, right? And if the Muslim organizations that Kristin and I then would, in this city, are working with would be labeled as terrorists, right? Yes, then all Muslims are obviously terrorists. So, I mean, it's interesting to see this rhetoric kind of being played out through various ways. There's obviously a reason why this bill is not introduced right now, and it's getting very little media attention. And so thinking about the climate of fear, and we've already mentioned different geopolitical events, such as September 11, 2001, we know after this kind of large event that there is a significant increase in hate crimes, in anti-Muslim discrimination, anti-Muslim aggression. And I would like to, in that context, mention just something drawing on interviews I'm doing at the moment with Muslim youth in our own city. I'm interviewing American Muslim young women and men self-identifying as Muslim in the age of 18 to 25 about their everyday life, experiences of belonging primarily, but also experience of discrimination. And those who are old enough to remember 9/11 have, significant life experiences that I would describe as trauma, definitely. Embodied, what I call embodied Islamophobia, these concrete everyday life experiences that scar people. Experience of anti-Muslim aggression that was heightened by September 11, and we're already now, after this ban, seeing very similar anti-Muslim aggression and anti-Muslim discrimination, similar experiences among many of the youth that I'm interviewing are also UWM students, right? And what they're talking about, those who remember 9/11, it is their houses, their personal homes, right, being attacked, being graffited, being egged, hijabi wearing women, hearing "go home," right, on a daily basis. Bomb threats, many bomb threats, as we know, to the Islamic schools. Pig carcasses being thrown on school grounds with swastikas and quite harmful messages engraved into it, right? And so these are traumas, and I think similar events obviously already stand out for many of our Muslim students. It's affecting all Muslims, affecting Muslims in our cities, affecting our students. And, on that note, I should also say, we were talking about campus and what we can do. It's amazing, in most of these interviews, our Muslim students are highlighting how campus, UWM campus, is one of the safe spaces, the spaces where they feel at home. And that's good, that feels good to hear, right, as an employee here. Anyway, kind of going on a little bit of what Kristin also touched on, this event, is about visas, but it's hard to not touch upon citizenship also as a concept, right? This affects, American citizens and who feel then alienated, stigmatized, and racialized. And in this sense, citizenship, yes, is a legal construct. It's a legal term, but it has really real. What's interesting is more what it means in people's social life, right? In their everyday life. The processes of social belonging, right? And in this sense, these youth, many of them, or if not most of them, born in the United States, right? Their citizenship is tainted, right? It's incomplete, and it's perpetually kind of challenged. And that's again what I think is where it's important to address the issues of justice and care here. How we can enact social norms and the different kind of struggles against bans, and maybe as a last note, I really don't pack myself well, but it seems like I'm good here. But I do think it would be interesting to just point out one thing. If you look at the American Muslim community, and you see the difference between, when 9/11 happened, a lot of Muslim activists speak about their organizations and their community as pretty kind of shocked and unprepared and so on. During these last 16 years, it's quite different kinds of Muslim American communities that we see. Communities are much more much more ready, well-versed how to handle situations and attacks like this. They are more politically mobilized. And I think more importantly, and we see that even within the Muslim community here in the city, the Muslim communities all throughout the country they have built important alliances with interfaith groups, with social and racial justice groups, whether it be Black Lives Matters or Roses, for that matter, in this city, or with civil rights groups such as ACLU, right? And so if we look at the organizations, they're much more politically mobilized and so on. But considering that, I think the American Muslim community have been fairly quiet in all this. And again, I think it is an expression of this climate of fear and the targeting of mainstream Muslim organizations such as CARE and ISM and so forth. And so maybe I'll just close it there.
All right, well, thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Odrcic. I'm an immigration lawyer, and I'm basically going to be focusing on just the nuts and bolts of immigration law, and I have to give you a caveat, and that's that I'm really going to be discussing what the law is right now versus what it ought to be, and I'd be happy to give my opinion about that, I guess, when we have a Q&A. So basically, don't hate me, because I'm going to say a lot of things that are probably going to shock you, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, but let me cut to the chase. Immigration law sucks. Just put it that way. It sucks. It is a stacked deck against the immigrant. And that can sometimes be very frustrating as an immigration lawyer in removal proceedings. But that's basically it. I was asked specifically to answer, I guess, two questions. One is pretty easy, and the other one is going to take me forever, and I'll try to... I only have 13 minutes. But first question is, what is a visa? That's an easy question. Basically, it is essentially considered like an entry document. It is something that is placed in a person's passport, and depending on what it is, it will be good for maybe 5 years, it'll be good for 10 years, meaning that person can use that to enter the United States, exit, enter. But this is very important to kind of get this distinction. What it gives you is it gives you an opportunity to go to a port of entry, like either you're up at the border, you want to go through, or you're at an international airport. It gives you that opportunity to be there and then say, please let me in, admit me into the United States. And just because you have that visa doesn't mean you're going to actually be admitted into the United States. A Customs and Border Patrol officer has quite a bit of discretion and power to say no. And I'll kind of explain this in a few minutes, that they actually have the power to take away your visa at the border and issue you an expedited removal order. So that's basically what a visa is. Now, I was asked also, is a visa a legal document? And when I got that question, I kind of panicked, because I was like, man, that is a loaded question. Like, Like, I'm a lawyer, I should know this, but like, how do I even start with that? And I kind of took that question to mean, what rights does a person have with a visa? What procedural safeguards do they have with a visa? And so, in order to kind of answer that, I kind of broke it down. And the first thing I have to do is just briefly discuss the types of visas. Okay, so I'm going to just non-immigrant versus immigrant. Get to that in a minute. Then I've got to go into this issue of inadmissibility versus deportability. I hope you guys, your eyes don't start glazing over, but I'm going to try to make this fun. Okay, inadmissibility versus deportability. Then I got to go into expedited removal versus what I call normal removal proceedings. And then finally, I put this down in my notes, Constitution versus Constitution. I don't know what I meant by that, but I'll get to it. Now, I have an idea, but so let me kind of start with types of visas. Now, the two broad categories is a non-immigrant visa and an immigrant visa. Now, when I started, I've been a lawyer now for a little bit over 15 years, and I've been an immigration lawyer for about 10 years. And when I started doing immigration law, I was really arrogant and cocky. I thought like, I could just pick this up. And I really got my ass kicked for the first year or two of just trying to learn immigration law. It was just so counterintuitive, it didn't make any sense. And so I remember the first time I saw this term, non-immigrant visa, and I literally was like, that's a typo. A non-immigrant visa doesn't make any sense. How can a visa be non-immigrant? But that's actually what the term is. I don't know if anyone else, am I the only one that's confused by that? Okay. Okay. But non-immigrant visa, what it means is that it's a visa that is temporary, and it's only for a specific purpose. And so Kristin had mentioned F1 student visa, H1B visa, the H2A visa, the agricultural visa, the B2 visitors visa. These are all non-immigrant visas. Basically means is that you're only coming in for a temporary period, and it's only for a specified reason, going to school, traveling, visiting, the agricultural work or whatever. The other type of visa is an immigrant visa, and that's really kind of another way to say lawful permanent residence or someone who has a green card. And someone who, and sometimes you could, well, not sometimes, or often you could have a non-immigrant visa holder adjust to permanent residence. So as an example, you have someone that's here on a student visa. And there's many ways that someone on an F1 could become a permanent resident. They could apply for asylum, for instance. They apply for asylum and that's granted. Once you're in asylum status for at least a year, you could go and apply for permanent residency of a green card. They could marry a U.S. citizen, hopefully not in a fakey kind of way, because that's really bad from the standpoint of immigration. They could at some point get optional practical training, and they get their employer really likes them and say, hey, we're gonna give you an H1B, and then at some point from H1B they're going to get an employment-based permanent residence. And there's even something called the diversity lottery. Have you ever heard of that? Okay. So it's basically like some parts of the country where there's not as many immigrants coming in. It's literally a lottery, and you could get a green card. And if you're here lawfully on a student visa, you could go that route as well. Lawful permanent residence, we mentioned U.S. citizenship. Lawful permanent residence is really the main way to get citizenship by naturalizing. There's sort of a different time periods. The general rule is that you've got to be a permanent resident for at least 5 years before you can apply to become a U.S. citizen. There's always a few exceptions here and there. Okay. So I mentioned this inadmissibility versus deportability part, and again, this is going to be this is a big aspect of kind of understanding sort of the rights that visa holders have here in the United States. Inadmissibility basically means that when you're seeking to come here, you need to be what's called admissible, meaning that there can't be something in that person's background that the U.S. would consider to be a problem. So there's different grounds of inadmissibility. There's health grounds. It used to be the case that if someone had HIV, they were inadmissible from the United States. That changed in 2009. Criminal grounds, that's basically my specialty, but there's criminal grounds of inadmissibility. There's also past immigration violations, national security grounds for inadmissibility. The one thing that gets a little bit confusing about inadmissibility is that we're generally talking about when you're trying to, you're going to a port of entry and you're saying, please admit me. But there are situations where people are inadmissible even if they're here living in the United States. Some people who are undocumented are technically inadmissible in the United States because they're here present without being admitted or inspected, and that's basically a ground of inadmissibility. When someone wants to apply for a green card here in the United States as opposed to a consulate, the process is called adjustment of status, and they basically have to be admissible. Basically, when it comes to inadmissibility, there's weaker constitutional and statutory rights. Believe it or not, there is no constitutional right to bail or bond if you're inadmissible. If you're coming into the United States and they think that you should leave, you don't have a right to be released at all, not even on bail or bond. There's a famous case from 1953. It was involving, I think it was a Hungarian guy that unfortunately made the mistake of visiting family behind what we used to call the Iron Curtain. And when he came back, they're like, well, you're a communist. They basically stripped him of his permanent residence, but they couldn't get him, no country would take him. And so he was stuck on Ellis Island for like 4 years. And the Supreme Court in 1953 basically said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Because basically we have powers that when we're trying to let people in, you just don't have as many constitutional rights, and so I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. And also that some people who are inadmissible, they could come in, they could go in front of an immigration judge, but there's a lot that cannot, and so. Basically, inadmissibility is sort of one aspect where you have weaker protections, I would say weaker rights. Deportability basically means once you've been admitted to the United States, okay, so you get through the main Customs and Border Patrol officer, and now you're here, and you're admitted to the United States. Far more rights and so forth. First of all, and basically the policy reason for deportability, what it's all about is that, okay, so you're here, and now they're saying that you committed some immigration violation. So if you've been convicted of certain crimes that are considered deportable offenses, they could put you in immigration court. If they believe that you violated your non-immigrant visa, say you're a student and you start working, you're not supposed to do that without certain authorization, or you stop going to class, then they could basically say, okay, we're going to put you in immigration court. But again, immigration court, oh my gosh, 3 minutes, okay. So basically, I'm going to kind of skip to expedited removal versus regular immigration court. Expedited removal, this is very important. Expedited removal at the border if the Border Patrol officer believes that you have either committed a mere material misrepresentation or fraud, or you no longer have a visa. They could just send you back without going in front of an immigration judge, without being able a right to a lawyer. There's no right to having a lawyer present. Even the Ninth Circuit, the most liberal circuit in the country, says no, you don't have a right to a lawyer with this expedited removal. And the big exception to that is that there's a credible fear. You could go in front of an immigration judge saying, I want to seek asylum. But you're going to be detained throughout that whole process. Regular immigration court, you're before an immigration judge, you have a statutory right to an attorney. The burden is on the government, clear and convincing evidence. I want to kind of give a couple quick examples. Probably going to be running out of time. But Edwidge Donnicott, the brother I'm dying. So her brother, her uncle Joseph, he's afraid. He wants to seek asylum, and he comes in to the port of entry. He has a visitor's visa. And they say, well, why are you coming in? It's like, well, I'm afraid and I want to seek asylum. And they say, okay, great, now we're going to detain you, we're going to put you in Chrome. And what they did was that he had a valid visitor's visa, but they canceled it. And so all of a sudden they're like, we can put you in expedited removal. And so I think what happened when he had died in Chrome is that he was waiting the credible fear determination to basically go in front of an immigration judge. Real quick, another example, and I'm just making this fictional person up. Let's call her Melania. And basically, let's suppose that Melania, she has a visitor's visa, and she's coming into the United States, and the customs officer says, what are you doing here? What are you planning? And she's like, well, I'm going to be doing some modeling, and I'm going to get all kind of money for it. And then the customs officer just say, you can't do that with a visitor's visa because you're supposed to only be here temporarily. You can't work on a visitor's visa. So they could basically say, Melania, we're going to take your visitor's visa away. Your decision, you could either withdraw your admission to the United States and just take the next plane to wherever she's from, Slovenia, for instance, or you'll get an expedited removal order. So I think I'm probably out of time here. I was going to talk a little bit about Constitution versus Constitution, but someone asked me a question and I'll explain that.
So before we ask questions, I do have a question that I want to start off with. And someone actually mentioned something about everyday life. And it occurs to me that one of the repercussions, one of the fallouts of this discussion is it drastically changes what we think of as everyday life. And I'm going to actually tell a story which I would like you guys to respond to. When long time ago when I was a grad student, that was a long time ago, I remember that if you lived in Southern California, as a South Asian, I was looking at South Asian immigration, there was this thing called misrecognition, that a brown person being recognized as Mexican. But there was also a response, which was a quick response to say you're not Mexican. Or if you take 9/11, Seattle Times had a very detailed description of good turbans and bad turbans. That's because the good turbans were beaten up thinking that they were very bad turbans. So essentially what I'm saying is there needed to be at that point alliances across groups, and we're beginning to see that now when the Jewish cemeteries were destroyed. Muslim organizations came in, and I'm trying to figure out, that's the positive thing that I see in everyday life that's happening. You need to have some positive things to people. But I wanted to ask the panel how they think that our everyday life is transformed for the good and bad, and do you have a good future in front of you?
Well, I know anecdotally that the crisis that Anna referred to, that Louise Kankar talks about, is true in many communities. Fear and, I was recently speaking in Western Michigan, and just asked a class I was talking to, what do you know about the recent executive orders about immigration? And students talked about people selling their cars, people moving out of their houses, people moving into communal households. In fact, a young woman approached me after my talk and said, we're having a big garage sale tomorrow. It's not really a garage sale, people are selling their stuff just so they have more liquid assets in case they're deported. And I think that we have to assume that that's the ground in most U.S. communities, that people who are undocumented, who should be remembered, live in communities with people, live in families, live in households with people who are citizens and people who are legal permanent residents. Undocumented people aren't like some people who live in some netherworld outside of our country. They're here. They're with citizens and other people. So I think there's that. I mean, I swim for exercise at the Jewish Community Center, which had 5 bomb threats from the inauguration till now. And though there's been, discovered the fake telebomber, I think that we have to take anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, nativism, anti-LGBTQ, like the upswing. There were 900 hate crimes in the week after the election, right? Most of them on campuses. So I think you're right, Arijit. Like the silver lining is, I think at best, we're seeing each other. But I also think it's hard to appreciate the terror that's prevalent.
I'll just chime in as, just from my standpoint as an immigration lawyer, there's definitely a lot of fear, and I think it's been challenging from my perspective because some of the fear is warranted and some of it's not, and it's difficult for me to kind of manage that because I'm a U.S. citizen. I don't have, when I come home and play with my kid, I don't have to think about I'm going to be separated from that kid. I don't have to think about ICE coming to my house and arresting me in front of my kid. I don't have to, all these things that my clients have to worry about, I have the luxury of not having to worry about it. And so I have to be careful with discussing that fear and trying to help clients. But at the same time, there have been, I think, aspects of I wouldn't exactly call it hysteria, but there's been just, like some rumor will be spread, and then people are just, freaking out. Now, the silver lining from the standpoint, what I see as an immigration lawyer, and this is going to be my prediction, is I think one of the biggest legacies of President Trump, assuming he's not gone in 2 weeks, wishful thinking perhaps, but I think one of the biggest legacies is that I think that there's going to be a lot more U.S. citizens. Because I'm seeing that I just have so many people that are like, I'm tired of being on the immigration system. I'm a permanent resident. I want to basically become a U.S. citizen, and so I can vote. So I'm just getting, I've been pretty busy for the past couple months. It's not been really like busy on the enforcement side, and it's there. It's definitely there, but I've been having so many more cases of people wanting to apply for green cards. They've been on the sidelines, and they're just like, you know what? He's prompting us to basically do the things that we probably should have thought about or should have done a while ago. So I don't know if that's really positive, but there are some green shoots that I'm seeing from my standpoint.
If you have any questions in the audience, yes.
Thank you all. I have a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask one now, and then we'll see how things go later. And sort of going off of what you just said and things that you said earlier, Rachel, what if we thought about the visa promise in relationship to the citizenship promise? I mean, as somebody who studies Japanese American incarceration during World War II, citizenship became pretty flimsy. The majority of Japanese Americans incarcerated were citizens by birth. And so I feel like we're talking about citizenship as a stable category, and historically it hasn't been a stable category, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that going forward.
I'm ready to jump right in on that. I actually think that we should not absolutely I think that we should be worried about citizenship and not think of it as a stable category. One of the things that Rachel said, stuff rolls uphill. So yeah, somebody could be a citizen now, interned tomorrow based on these other categories that get assigned to them, enemy national. I mean, we can go back before that, well, not so much internment here in Wisconsin, but during World War I, we had all these German Americans walking the streets speaking German, and then there were book burnings in Baraboo. So with foreign relations, the policing of internal groups ramps up. I guess the reason that I wanted to bring up the concept of citizenship even was to get to this question of how it's the legal, but also the relationship to the polity. But more in the sense of what Rachel was talking about in terms of what can we leverage? Whether it's not, I'm a U.S. citizen, so what can I leverage as a U.S. citizen? Because what can somebody who's got a visa that seems relatively safe leverage to do things in solidarity with other people? Based on not just one citizenship, but these other valorizations and devalorizations that get layered on who really belongs and who doesn't belong. I mean, the mosques that have been attacked, large part. I mean, here in Milwaukee, through the Muslim Milwaukee Project, when we did our household survey of the people who responded to the survey, 60% are citizens. Okay, and it's higher than what we hear in other cities. But again, none of that matters when it comes to hate crimes. And as you're saying, these things, when it comes to a particular arm of the state, they stop mattering. So I want to absolutely agree with you that we shouldn't just assume it as a stable category. And then the question becomes, okay, so how do we stop? What can we and do we leverage to try to create safer spaces and try to be ready to have any practices in place to stop things like the deportations, or to watch out for when some kind of order of something like an I mean, again, it's stopping the Muslim registry is a step in that direction, since that's a population that's being targeted. Because if there aren't as many names on a list, it's that much harder to round people up. I mean, this is one of my big concerns about the DACA students now, the deferred action students. I mean, especially given, and again, coming back to the question of like what kind of solidarities do we see? I mean, I know of deferred action students who were protesting, who were in the No DAPL actions here in town, who were protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline, and graduate students of international status who were at a candlelight. You know, there have been all kinds of people going to all kinds of actions, and depending on what one thinks police presence might be, it might be more or less risky. So we can't just think about it in terms of, oh yeah, I'm a citizen, I'm fine, everything's going to be hunky-dory, but relate it to these other ways of profiling, recognizing or misrecognizing that are likely to happen. And also think of this in terms of when, if people are engaging in activism, be aware of who in the group is most likely to be targeted, and those who are least likely to be targeted might need to be the ones to step forward and be ready to try to protect those who are most likely to be targeted in the case of actual direct actions. So there are a lot of spaces in which this can mean really different things. Sorry.
I just want to jump in real quick that because I just saw this email. You'd mentioned sort of the Japanese-American internment. There's going to be a talk in Madison, I think at the law school, on Korematsu, the infamous decision. And they're actually going to be having someone who was a Japanese-American who was actually there that will kind of talk about firsthand experience. And of course, I don't remember, just saw the email, but it's probably going to be sometime in the next month or so. I think it's going to be hosted at the law school in Madison. So.
I just wanted a clarification. If you were mentioning the sanctuary resort that the faculty has signed, can you please explain a little more about it? Because I've never heard about it before. What's going on?
Oh, the sanctuary city.
So,
campus.
So, yeah, it's really confusing in Milwaukee. So, just on campus, the Faculty Senate ratified a sanctuary campus document in October. Yeah? Because the tip, or in November.
This is December.
That was the final, though. Anyway, whatever. Okay. We ratified one late last year. And the Faculty Senate is, meets in this room. There's a lot of us, but we don't have a lot of power. It was, look, the thing about sanctuary resolutions, though they're very controversial, is they're symbolic, and we have to do what I heard one activist call media jujitsu, right? We're saying, we don't accept this. I think it's also symbolic when Jeff Sessions says we're going to clamp down on sanctuary cities, because I'm really not sure that's constitutional, and I think it remains to be seen, right? So we said sanctuary campus. The administration said, "Oh, we can't say that S word," and then they, the chancellor put out those two missives that I referred to. So what I'm saying here is there's not policy. There's the faculty saying we need to deal with this. This is what we want. There's student pressure. The students at the same time were circulating sanctuary campus bill. Then there was the administrative response, which fell far short of what we wanted. The work is undone. There's been a lot of we mean to do this. This is a good idea. It would be nice. We want to support people. We need to give that traction. We need to be where the rubber hits the road. Because we can use these claims as legitimating what we think is important, right? And so I think these are grounds for more work. Everything is right now, right? Everything means we just have to work harder. There's also, it should be said, been a sanctuary bill passed at the county supervisors level that passed in December after the, not related to, but after the Faculty Senate resolution that went further in saying that ICE could not, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement couldn't make raids that we would protect against this. But we have a sheriff who's very activist in the other way. If I was putting on my soothsaying hat, my chair is here, so don't, historians aren't supposed to do this. But if I was predicting the future, I would say Milwaukee is going to be one of the test cases because we have a very toxic, very, very powerful mix here of a really strong immigrant rights movement, an activated community that is heard at the county, at least the county and the municipal level, and then a county sheriff who's achieved national visibility by saying cowboy crazy things and by stationing county sheriffs at the courthouse. So if you're undocumented and you go to pay a traffic ticket or go to family court, you can be deported. Now, I'll stop there. Anyway, I think stuff is going to go on here early. In the session's kind of promise to clamp down on sanctuary cities and sanctuary cities.
And Rachel, didn't MPS just pass a sanctuary district?
Did it pass last night?
Last night.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of stuff.
Could I just add to that? With respect to campus, I mean, some of the things because things might be working out differently for different students, but there are different aspects of this. Some of the, and I have some extra copies here, but it's online, you can look for it, but I'm happy to share this copy with you. They're supposed to be providing counseling undocumented and deferred action students on their education basis. There's supposed to be resources secured for students whose legal status may change or who may be unable to travel. These resources may include access to online courses. That is in line with our access mission. There's supposed to be specific training for staff, faculty, and counselors on the need of all kinds of, various kinds of students. This is also supposed to protect student information under FERPA, meaning we're not supposed to provide students' legal status to ICE, and that includes undocumented students, deferred action students, and international students. We're not supposed to be handing over their information to anybody. And there's not supposed to be raids. So this affects a lot of different groups of students who are really important to our campus.
Jamie.
So I wanted to just follow up on a point that Delvin was making and also you about mutual recognition or the citizenship. I had a student recently talking who has U.S. citizenship and she was talking about how she's really curtailing activity. We go to summer fest now, and that, so relating that this is sort of a consensus in her family, and I think there's sort of blurring, when you have families where there's mixed citizenship status. But I guess the larger question I wanted to ask the panel is, because there's been some indication in California, there's articles about kids being pulled out of school, and I'm wondering if you have any sense of how that's playing out in Milwaukee in terms of, whether it's not seeking health providers or whether kids are being pulled out of school or other kinds of activities. Do you have a sense of that? And then are there ways that we can try to monitor and address that? That seems like, it has broader implications. So I'm curious.
I will mention one aspect of, I guess this might address part of your question. One of the big concerns is ICE showing up at courthouses when people are going to, whether it's a traffic ticket or a misdemeanor or whatever. Let me mention this, and this is what I'm reporting, and this is clearly what I'm about to say is the terms are racist, but we have to kind of talk about this. So there are certain counties in Wisconsin that they just don't have the resources to have interpreters there all the time. And so they'll basically have folks that are Spanish speaking on one docket during the week or the month or whatever. And the terminology for these dockets is like Taco Tuesday, Fiesta Friday, whatever. So what was happening is that, and this was happening well before Trump became president, is ICE was coming to these dockets with arrest warrants and arresting people that were at court to dispose of, usually like operating after revocation or operating without a license. The two biggest probably offenses that undocumented folks commit are those, basically driving without a license, because there's not exactly like great public transportation in Racine, for instance. And then if you have to either drive to work or you got to drive your kids to school, you're just going to drive them, okay? And I've always kind of thought that those were also sort of a cash cow for the counties too. Like they just basically will park and they'll just like keep dinging the same person. It's sort of like taxing, like another $150, $100, $200. But ICE would kind of show up, and the Racine newspaper, I don't know the name of it, they several years ago they came out with a really good article about this. And it kind of cracked me up because I'd see now these articles from like the New York Times and Washington Post, and they were trying to make it out as though, and I'm not obviously a fan of Trump, but they're trying to make it like it's sui generis to like Trump, like all of a sudden this is happening and never happened before. And it's kind of funny to me because it's like, well, actually this small little Racine newspaper got the scoop a long time ago. No one was paying attention. They just sort of assumed that the stuff that was happening under Obama, because Obama was kind of supposed to be progressive and liberal, it's been happening for a while. And it's going to continue to happen. And it's very frustrating because it puts the defense attorney and it puts the person in an impossible situation. They don't show up to court, they're going to get hit with a bail jumping because they failed to go to court. They go to court, and now they got fear that they're going to get picked up by ICE. And how do you sort of plan for that? You have to basically say, okay, well, I have to hand over my keys and my debit card to, I guess, my family, and I have to kind of have this whole game plan when it might not even kind of come up because maybe the defense attorney's not thinking about it, no one's kind of thinking about it. And it's a really awful thing. I don't even know how else to put it than that.
So I want to know about a term which I have been encountering a number of times when I'm doing the legal paperwork. And whenever I look into the term, I try to literally and figuratively try to look into the mirror and see what it means. It says that we are non-residential aliens. Can you just explain what the term means and how alien could be categorized alongside with you?
Well, that's a great question, and let me tell you that everything about immigration, the way I would describe it is like something from the 50s. I mean, everything is outdated. Immigration court system is outdated. If that's a deportation machine, it's an IBM from the 50s, one of those things that would take up half of this auditorium. But you're right, the term alien is absolutely outdated, and I hope in my lifetime that they change it. And in fact, there was a decision, I don't remember the name of it, I think it's called Flores. It's from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers like Ohio and Michigan maybe, but I think it's called Flores. And that whole decision basically says that when someone has temporary protected status, they can apply for adjustment of status here in the United States, get a green card if they're married to a U.S. citizen. It's kind of a big deal. And in that decision, they're mentioning the term alien, and in the footnote, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals says, you know what, this is really an offensive term, and someone's got to change it. And there's other courts that basically, have done that. And when I have to basically go to court and I got all kinds of my briefing, I have to use the term because it's the legal term. I neglected to say the term arriving alien, but that's kind of a big legal term in immigration law because you're right. How can you not be sort of offended by that term at this point?
One last question to the answer.
I was wondering if you have any advice about the recent cell phone inspections that are happening at the airport, at the ports of entry. And I know that the regulation for this varies by the state to some extent. So do you have any advice about this? Are we obligated to give the officer our cell phone? Or no, we don't have such a right? Because if we give it to them and unlock it, they can make a copy of all of private information that we have, and no one wants to do that. So,
right.
Any suggestion regarding that?
Practical suggestion is somehow don't fly with your phone. The problem is that this is going to be litigated, but the position from the government is that when you're entering the United States, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply because there's sort of what they call the border exception. So they don't need reasonable suspicion to start looking through your stuff. They don't need reasonable suspicion means there's got to be some sort of hunch that there's something that you have that could be problematic. And it's a huge problem, and it affects U.S. citizens, by the way. They could basically, and there's been several disturbing articles recently of U.S. citizens. Someone from NASA, for instance, he's like, this is actually not my phone, it's NASA's, and it's got like really secrets that I can't give to you. It's like government to government, arguments. So I don't really have a great advice for you other than you could challenge it, but expect it to be sort of maybe staring down an officer and maybe being at the airport for a while. But I think there was something about that you don't have to give them your one way or the other, like either the number or the thumb or the fingerprint. I don't remember, but.
What I had read was with respect to, say, local police. They'll take the phone, but if you secured it with a code, they can't make you open it. But I thought that I also read across some news coverage that said with respect to at the airport, they were just they would require people to.
Right.
What you're saying about this whole border exception.
The border exception to the Fourth Amendment. Yeah, and they're going to try to litigate it at some point. Right, exactly.
We are out of time, but there is a person who's been really raising her hand for a long time, so go ahead and ask the question.
So, I'm the director of the ESL program, so I manage a lot of student fears and anxieties on a daily basis. Yesterday I got an email from one of my students, he's Italian, his father, who was concerned about his other son, who's a third student, because when he first came into the country in 2012, as an F1 student, went to Boston University, but could speak no English. And he came in, and because he wasn't flashing his F1 visa, they were basically questioning him, and he didn't know what they were saying because he had zero English. So they brought him into a side room and questioned him for 3 hours. He did have all his documentation in a folder, pulled it out, I'm an F1, I'm going to ESL, and they let him in. But the consequence of that is every time he enters into the country, and he goes home to Italy on vacation, comes back, he gets basically sidelined by immigration and questioned for hours. It's happened 3 times in Chicago. It's happened once in Detroit. The only time he's been able to come into the country without getting stopped was with his father and his brother in Atlanta. But his father reached out to me and said, listen, I'm a little concerned because another Italian friend of theirs whose father had a green card was coming in, and they sent him back. We don't know the situation around it. But the father is genuinely concerned about my son's third year. He wants to go home for the summer. Will he not be allowed in because of this repeated, he's consistently being pulled out by ICE for no good reason because we checked his passport's up to date until 2019. He's got his F1 is up, is current. There's no issues, but it's a valid question. I really don't know what to say to his father. I am directing the young man to our Center of International Education, and they're willing to write a letter on his behalf. But as a lawyer, immigration lawyer, do you have any other advice I can give both the student and his father? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, this is not an uncommon issue, and again, I kind of mentioned sort of nothing works right in immigration. It's just like this IBM machine from the 50s, and I think that I've had so many clients with like criminal convictions where they'll get placed into the same issue. That there's like issues about whether they're admissible to the United States. They'll get placed into deferred inspection, and I provide a letter saying no, here's the law, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, and But for some reason, what happens is that when you come in and they do sort of, swipe or, even fingerprint or whatever pops up just pops up again. And they don't seem to have internally a system to be like, it's like Groundhog Day, the movie.
Right.
And so a couple sort of things I would recommend. One is that there is, on CBP, there's on their website, there's actually a complaint form that you could kind of do online. It's worth trying to basically just kind of spell out, like, and in specifics, this. So you have, at least in their system, that you've explained this and gotten some kind of response, hopefully something that's somewhat helpful. So when he comes in, he's like, you know what, this is basically what's happened every time I went on the CBP website. I've kind of complained that this is an issue. I suspect that he'll be fine, because I think that it's just sort of like they're wasting time, but I think he'll be fine, because it's just, they just have to, like, whatever is in there, they have to check over and over again. And I know that's probably unnerving and scary, but I mean, go ahead.
This kind of is a long way around back to Jasmine's question. Like, rights are being eroded. Muhammad Ali's son was stopped and interrogated at the border. He was born here, right? But he had a Muslim last name. So, on the one hand, I think Gav has the legal knowledge about this particular case, but I think we can expect this stuff to creep. When the rights of anyone are eroded, the rights of everyone are eroded. That's not rhetoric. That's just how it happens. Like I wanted to say in response to Jasmine, there's also denaturalization. Rasmia O'Day, who's about to be kicked out of the country forever, was a citizen. But they decided she was a terrorist, and they retroactively revoked her citizenship. This stuff gets crazy. And that's, as a scholar of the Cold War, I don't even want to get started. You don't want to hear about it.
So we have run out of time. I do have a request from all of you here who are my colleagues. I have seen that in my own school that our administrators are often woefully ignorant about what even a visa means, because Americans don't need to have visas in many places, although they will, I hope, very soon. It's an experience that all of you should. But I'm just saying that if you take it to your own departments and make people aware that these are actual issues, there are legal stuff, and we can actually read up on these things. And that not everybody is as equal and free as we think of others. I wanted to, on that note, thank the panelists and C21 again, Leila, and everyone who came. Thank you very much.